a billionaire's cruel joke, a cleaning woman with a hidden past, a 7-year-old genius who remembers everything. When Marcus Hollow invited his maid to the city's most exclusive gala to humiliate her, he had no idea Rebecca Vandermeer would walk through those doors and shatter his world forever. What happens when the woman you tried to destroy holds the key to your downfall? And what secrets does her extraordinary daughter carry in her photographic memory? Before the story begins, wherever life has placed you today, this message is for you. "Sign for the envelope, Miss Hayes," the courier said, thrusting a gilded invitation toward Rebecca as she scrubbed the marble floors of the Hollow Industries executive suite. Rebecca's weathered hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, embossed in gold lettering, was an invitation to the annual Manhattan Elite Gala at the Grand Celestial Ballroom. Her heart sank. This had to be a mistake. "Mommy, what is it?" 7-year-old Sophie looked up from her coloring book in the corner, her bright green eyes reflecting unusual awareness for her age. The girl had been sitting quietly, as she always did during Rebecca's late shifts, her small frame tucked into the oversized cleaning closet that doubled as their waiting room. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just junk mail," Rebecca whispered, crumpling the invitation. But it wasn't junk mail. At that exact moment, 50 floors above in his penthouse office, Marcus Hollow laughed with his executive board, champagne glasses raised in celebration of their cruelest joke yet. "I actually sent the cleaning woman an invitation," Marcus announced, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he gestured dramatically. Can you imagine? Rebecca Hayes in her discount store clothes, trying to blend in with Manhattan royalty. The room erupted in laughter. Gerald Pembroke, the CFO, nearly choked on his drink. "Marcus, you're diabolical. What's the point?" "Entertainment, Gerald. Pure entertainment." Marcus swirled his whiskey, a predatory smile crossing his sharp features. "She'll either show up and embarrass herself, or she'll stay home knowing her place. Either way, we win." What Marcus didn't know was that Rebecca had heard every word. The ventilation system in the Hollow Industries tower carried sound in mysterious ways, and Sophie, with her extraordinary auditory memory, had recorded every syllable in her remarkable mind. "Mommy, why is the mean man laughing about you?" Sophie asked later that night in their tiny studio apartment in Queens. The girl's photographic memory and unusual perceptiveness had always unnerved Rebecca. At 7 years old, Sophie could recall conversations from years ago, remember the exact placement of objects she'd seen once, and read people's intentions with disturbing accuracy. Rebecca knelt down, holding her daughter's small hands. "Some people think they're better than others because they have money, baby, but they're wrong. Are you going to the party?" Sophie's green eyes searched her mother's face with intensity that seemed far beyond her years. Rebecca looked at the crumpled invitation on their second-hand coffee table. Something inside her stirred, something she'd buried 8 years ago when her world collapsed. A memory of who she used to be before she became Rebecca Hayes, professional cleaning woman and invisible ghost in Manhattan's towers of power. "Maybe I will," Rebecca whispered more to herself than to Sophie. That night, Rebecca pulled a locked box from under her bed. Sophie watched silently as her mother extracted a pearl necklace, a faded photograph, and a driver's license that read, "Rebecca Vandermeer, heir to Vandermeer Industries." "Who's that, Mommy?" Sophie asked, pointing at the name. "Someone I used to be," Rebecca replied, her voice breaking. "Before your father died, before everything fell apart, the Vandermeer name once commanded respect in Manhattan's highest circles. Rebecca's family had built a pharmaceutical empire worth billions until a corporate scandal she knew nothing about destroyed everything. Her father went to prison. Her mother died of heartbreak. And Rebecca, pregnant and alone at 23, had disappeared into the shadows of the city that once celebrated her. She changed her name. She took the lowest jobs available. She became invisible. And for 8 years, she'd scrubbed the floors of the very buildings where she once attended charity galas in designer gowns. But Marcus Hollow had made a critical mistake. He'd sent an invitation to a ghost. And ghosts, when provoked, have a way of coming back to haunt you. "Sophie," Rebecca said, determination replacing despair in her voice, "how would you like to see Mommy wear a beautiful dress?" The little girl's face lit up with a smile that could melt the coldest heart. "Really, Mommy? Like a princess?" "Yes, baby, like a princess." Rebecca pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll remind some people that you can't judge a book by its cover." What Rebecca didn't tell Sophie was that she still had access to one thing Marcus Hollow would never expect: her family's hidden vault in the old Vandermeer estate, now abandoned and forgotten by everyone, except the woman who used to live there. Inside that vault was not just jewelry and gowns, but documents, evidence, proof of things that powerful men desperately wanted to stay buried. Marcus Hollow thought he was inviting a powerless cleaning woman to humiliate her for sport. He had no idea he was about to face Rebecca Vandermeer, risen from the ashes of a destroyed empire, armed with the truth and accompanied by a 7-year-old girl whose extraordinary memory had witnessed things she shouldn't have during countless hours in corporate offices. The gala was 3 days away, was 3 days. 3 days for Rebecca to reclaim her identity, 3 days for Sophie to prepare the photographic evidence locked in her remarkable mind, 3 days until Manhattan's elite learned that the most dangerous person in any room is the one they've chosen to ignore. "Mommy," Sophie said as Rebecca tucked her into bed that night, "I remember things. Things I saw in Mr. Hollow's office. Bad things in papers he left on his desk. Should I tell someone?" Rebecca's heart stopped. "What kind of things, sweetheart?" "Numbers that don't match. Names of people who got sick. Papers that say, 'Destroy before audit.'" "I remember all of it, Mommy, every page, every word." Rebecca sat in stunned silence. Her 7-year-old daughter, sitting quietly in corners while Rebecca cleaned, had been the perfect invisible witness to corporate crime. Sophie's photographic memory had captured what prosecutors had searched for during her father's trial years ago, proof of pharmaceutical fraud at the highest levels. And Marcus Hollow's company had recently acquired what remained of Vandermeer Industries. "Yes, baby," Rebecca whispered, her mind racing with implications. "Yes, you should tell someone, and I know exactly when and where you're going to do it." The game had changed. This wasn't about a humiliated maid anymore. This was about justice. This was about truth. This was about a mother and daughter who had survived in the shadows long enough. Marcus Hollow wanted entertainment at his gala. He was about to get a show he'd never forget. And the most dangerous thing about Rebecca Vandermeer wasn't her hidden identity or her family's destroyed legacy. It was that she had nothing left to lose and everything to expose. The invitation sat on the coffee table, no longer crumpled but pressed flat. Rebecca stared at it until dawn, planning every move, anticipating every reaction, preparing for the moment when she would walk through those ballroom doors and reclaim not just her name, but her dignity, her truth, and her revenge. Sophie slept peacefully, her photographic memory holding evidence that could topple empires. And in 3 days, that little girl with green eyes and an extraordinary mind would stand before Manhattan's elite and remember everything they desperately tried to forget. The countdown had begun. The pawns were in position. And the woman Marcus Hollow thought he could humiliate was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the power of a mother protecting her child and the truth she spent 8 years preparing to reveal. The Manhattan elite gala preparation consumed the city's upper echelon with fever-pitch anticipation. In the Hollow Industries Tower, Marcus personally oversaw every detail, his excitement over the impending humiliation of his cleaning woman growing by the hour. "Has anyone confirmed whether she's actually coming?" his assistant Jennifer asked, scrolling through the RSVP list on her tablet. Marcus grinned wickedly. "Oh, she'll come. People like her can't resist the opportunity to glimpse our world, even if it destroys them. It's like watching moths fly into flames, tragic, inevitable, and oddly satisfying." What Marcus didn't notice was Sophie, sitting in the corner of his office while Rebecca cleaned, her young eyes absorbing every document he carelessly left on his desk. The child's photographic memory was recording offshore account numbers, falsified pharmaceutical trial results, and email threads that would make federal prosecutors salivate. "Mr. Hollow," Sophie said suddenly, her voice clear and precise, "why does this paper say patient deaths not statistically significant when there are 73 names listed below it?" The room froze. Marcus turned slowly, his expression shifting from amusement to fury. "What did you say?" Rebecca rushed over, grabbing Sophie's hand. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hollow. She's just a child. She doesn't understand what she's reading. She shouldn't be reading anything." Marcus snatched the document from his desk, his face flushing red. "This is confidential corporate material. If I find out you or your nosy daughter have been going through my papers—" "We haven't," Rebecca interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Sophie just has an unusual memory. She glances at things and remembers them. She doesn't mean any harm." Marcus studied Sophie with new, calculating interest. The girl stared back, unflinching, her green eyes holding an intelligence that made him uncomfortable. "Get out, both of you, now." As Rebecca hurried Sophie toward the door, Marcus called after them. "I'll see you at the gala, Rebecca. I do hope you'll bring your observant little daughter. I'm sure she'll find the evening educational." The threat hung in the air. Rebecca's hands shook as she led Sophie to the elevator. "Mommy, I remember all 73 names," Sophie whispered. "Patricia Wilkins, age 47. Thomas Chen, age 52. Maria Rodriguez—" "Stop, baby, not here." Rebecca's heart pounded. Her daughter had just memorized evidence of pharmaceutical negligence that Marcus Hollow had spent millions to bury. The same kind of evidence that had destroyed Rebecca's father, evidence she now suspected had been fabricated by the very man who employed her to scrub his floors. That evening, Rebecca made a decision. She drove to a location she hadn't visited in 8 years, the abandoned Vandermeer estate in Connecticut, now a crumbling monument to her family's fall from grace. Sophie sat quietly in the back seat, watching the landscape blur past with her unnervingly attentive gaze. The estate's gates hung broken, the gardens had gone wild, but Rebecca knew exactly where to go, the underground vault her father had built, accessible only through a hidden entrance in the old library. "What is this place, Mommy?" Sophie asked, as they navigated through dusty hallways lined with covered furniture. "This was my home, sweetheart. Before you were born, before everything changed." Rebecca found the library, pulled the correct book from the shelf and watched as a section of wall slid open, revealing a steel door with a biometric lock. She pressed her hand against the scanner. Nothing happened. 8 years was a long time. Maybe the system was dead. Maybe— The lock clicked, the door swung open, and inside, perfectly preserved, was the evidence of who Rebecca Vandermeer used to be. Designer gowns hung in protective covers, jewelry boxes filled with diamonds her grandmother had worn, and most importantly, file cabinets containing her father's research, his notes, his desperate attempts to prove he'd been framed for pharmaceutical fraud. "Mommy, these papers smell old," Sophie said, running her small fingers over a manila folder. "But I can read them. Should I remember them?" Rebecca knelt down, cupping her daughter's face. "Yes, baby. I need you to remember everything in this vault. Can you do that for Mommy?" For the next 3 hours, Sophie methodically examined every document in the vault. Her photographic memory absorbed pharmaceutical formulas, email communications, board meeting minutes, and most critically, proof that Marcus Hollow's predecessor at Hollow Industries had systematically framed Daniel Vandermeer to cover up their own negligence in drug trials that had killed dozens of people. Marcus had inherited not just a company, but a cover-up, and based on the documents Sophie had seen in his office, he'd continued the same deadly practices, burying patient deaths under layers of falsified data and legal maneuvering. "I've memorized everything, Mommy," Sophie announced at midnight, her young face showing unusual focus. "Every name, every number, every date. Want me to recite it?" "Not yet, sweetheart, soon." Rebecca selected a midnight blue gown from the collection, her mother's favorite, and a set of Vandermeer pearls worth more than Marcus Hollow's favorite sports car. "First, we need to make sure everyone at that gala knows exactly who we are." The next morning, Rebecca made several phone calls from burner phones purchased specifically for this purpose. She contacted investigative journalists who'd covered her father's case. She reached out to retired federal prosecutors who'd always suspected the Vandermeer conviction was built on manufactured evidence. And she called Channel 7 News, anonymously tipping them off that something extraordinary would happen at the Manhattan Elite Gala. "Why are you calling all these people, Mommy?" Sophie asked, watching her mother with curious eyes. "Because, baby, when you tell the truth, you need witnesses. Lots of witnesses." Rebecca smiled, feeling more alive than she had in 8 years. "And we're about to tell the biggest truth Manhattan has heard in a very long time." Marcus Hollow spent the day before the gala in gleeful anticipation. He'd arranged for Rebecca to be seated at the worst table in the ballroom, near the kitchen doors, with full visibility so everyone could watch her squirm. He'd instructed the security team to monitor her, ready to escort her out at the first sign of inappropriate behavior. He'd even prepared a speech where he'd publicly acknowledge his generous decision to invite all members of the Hollow Industries family, regardless of their position. What he didn't prepare for was Rebecca Vandermeer. That evening, as Sophie slept peacefully in their apartment, Rebecca stood before a mirror holding the midnight blue gown. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. 8 years of cleaning floors, 8 years of invisibility, 8 years of survival had carved lines into her face. But underneath, the woman she used to be was still there, waiting to emerge. "Tomorrow," she whispered to her reflection. Marcus Hollow learns that some ghosts don't stay buried. Some ghosts come back stronger, smarter, and absolutely merciless. She thought of her father, who died in prison protesting his innocence. She thought of her mother, whose heart gave out from the shame and loss. She thought of Sophie, her remarkable daughter who deserved better than a life in the shadows. And she made a promise to all of them. Tomorrow night, justice would be served cold, elegant, and absolutely devastating. The Manhattan Elite Gala was 12 hours away. The guest list included senators, celebrities, corporate titans, and the city's most influential power brokers. Media would be everywhere, security would be tight. And in the center of it all, Marcus Hollow would deliver his cruel joke, expecting his cleaning woman to crumble under the weight of public humiliation. Instead, he was about to face Rebecca Vandermeer, flanked by a 7-year-old girl whose photographic memory held the evidence to destroy him, armed with documents that proved decades of corporate murder, and ready to reclaim not just her name, but the justice that had been stolen from her family. "Sleep well, Marcus," Rebecca said softly, laying the gown across her bed. "Tomorrow you meet the woman you should never have noticed, and by the time the sun rises on Monday morning, your empire will be ashes, your reputation will be ruins, and you'll finally understand what it feels like to be powerless." Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring numbers and names, the 73 people whose deaths Marcus had dismissed as statistically insignificant. Their families would finally have answers. The truth would finally surface. And a mother and daughter who'd survived 8 years in exile would finally step back into the light. The invitation on Rebecca's nightstand seemed to glow in the darkness. Tomorrow it would serve as evidence, proof that Marcus Hollow had personally orchestrated his own downfall by inviting the one person who could destroy him. "Thank you for the invitation, Marcus," Rebecca whispered. "I accept." The grand celestial ballroom glittered with crystalline chandeliers and enough wealth to feed a small nation. Manhattan's elite arrived in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, air-kissing and networking as classical music drifted through the cavernous space. Marcus Hollow stood near the entrance, champagne in hand, waiting for his entertainment to arrive. "Has anyone seen her yet?" he asked Gerald Pembroke, scanning the crowd with predatory anticipation. "Not yet. Maybe she chickened out. Realized this wasn't her world," Gerald replied, adjusting his bow tie. "No," Marcus said confidently. "She'll come. Pride makes people do stupid things, and watching her realize she doesn't belong will be the highlight of my year." At exactly 7:47 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. The string quartet faltered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the entrance. Rebecca Vandermeer stood framed in the doorway, transformed. The midnight blue gown flowed like liquid sapphire against her skin. The Vandermeer pearls caught the chandelier light, throwing iridescent reflections across the marble floor. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical bun, cascaded in elegant waves. And beside her, wearing a white silk dress and holding her mother's hand with perfect poise, stood Sophie, her green eyes surveying the crowd with unusual intensity. "Jesus Christ," Gerald breathed. "Is that impossible?" Marcus whispered, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. "That's not my cleaning woman, that can't be—" But it was. And as Rebecca walked through the parted crowd with the confidence of someone reclaiming stolen territory, recognition began rippling through the older guests. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's Rebecca Vandermeer. I thought she was dead. She disappeared after her father's trial. What is she doing here?" Marcus's mind raced. Rebecca Vandermeer, the Vandermeer heiress who'd vanished 8 years ago. The daughter of Daniel Vandermeer, whose pharmaceutical company his predecessor had acquired after the fraud scandal. His cleaning woman was Rebecca Vandermeer, and he'd just publicly invited her to humiliate her. Rebecca approached Marcus with a smile that could freeze hell. "Thank you so much for the invitation, Mr. Hollow. It's been far too long since I attended a Manhattan gala. You remember those days, don't you? When my family hosted events like this, and you were desperate for an invitation?" The nearby guests gasped. Marcus's face turned the color of his wine. "Rebecca, It's Miss Vandermeer, actually," she interrupted smoothly. "Hayes was my mother's maiden name. I used it for privacy purposes. But I think it's time we were honest with each other, don't you?" Sophie stepped forward, her young voice clear and carrying. "Mr. Hollow, I've been meaning to talk to you about those papers in your office, the ones about the Cardovan drug trials. My mummy says I should share what I remember with the nice people from the FDA who just arrived. Marcus's blood ran cold. What? Oh yes, Rebecca said pleasantly, gesturing toward the entrance where federal agents were quietly entering, accompanied by journalists with cameras. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of inviting a few additional guests. They're very interested in meeting Sophie. She has such a remarkable memory for details. Dates, names, patient death reports. She remembers everything she saw while sitting in your office these past 3 months. The color drained from Marcus's face. Around them, guests were pulling out phones, recording everything. The Channel 7 news crew had positioned cameras throughout the ballroom. This wasn't just social embarrassment anymore. This was a public prosecution. You set me up, Marcus hissed. You've been planning this. I've been surviving, Rebecca corrected coldly. You invited me here to humiliate me. You thought I was powerless. You thought I was nobody. But you made 3 critical mistakes, Marcus. First, you underestimated a mother's love for her child. Second, you forgot that the Vandermeer name once meant something in this city. And third, you left confidential documents where a 7-year-old girl with a photographic memory could see them while you laughed about destroying her mother. Sophie pulled a small voice recorder from her dress pocket. Should I play the recordings now, Mummy? The ones where Mr. Hollow talks about hiding patient deaths and bribing FDA inspectors? Marcus lunged forward, but security, federal security, immediately blocked his path. That's illegal surveillance, that's entrapment. That's a child who happened to overhear conversations in a workplace where her mother had every legal right to be, Rebecca countered. And everything she witnessed is about to become public record. The 73 patients who died during your Cardovan trials, the falsified clinical data, the offshore accounts used to pay off researchers. Sophie remembers it all, Marcus. Every document, every conversation, every crime you committed, while assuming she was just another invisible poor kid you could ignore. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Federal agents approached Marcus with badges displayed. Journalists shouted questions. Society doyens who'd been laughing at Marcus's planned humiliation 30 minutes ago now scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She climbed onto the small stage where the string quartet had been playing, Sophie beside her, and addressed the crowd in a voice that commanded absolute attention. 8 years ago, my father was sent to prison for pharmaceutical fraud he didn't commit. He died there, protesting his innocence. My mother died of heartbreak, and I disappeared because I couldn't bear to face this world that had destroyed my family. She paused, letting her words sink in, but I never stopped searching for the truth. And tonight, with the help of my extraordinary daughter and the evidence she's accumulated, I'm here to tell you that Daniel Vandermeer was framed by the very company Marcus Hollow now runs. The real criminals were never punished. Until now. Sophie held up a USB drive. This has copies of everything I memorized. All the secret papers, all the bad things. Mommy says the truth should never be hidden. A federal prosecutor stepped forward, accepting the drive with barely concealed excitement. Ms. Vandermeer, we'll need complete statements from both you and your daughter. Of course, Rebecca said. We're fully prepared to cooperate. Unlike Mr. Hollow, we have nothing to hide. Marcus stood paralyzed as his world collapsed around him. The gala he'd orchestrated to humiliate a powerless cleaning woman had become the stage for his own destruction, and the woman he'd mocked, belittled, and underestimated was the architect of his downfall. As federal agents led Marcus away in handcuffs, Rebecca descended from the stage. The crowd, just moments ago eager to participate in her humiliation, now parted with respect and fear. Rebecca Vandermeer had just demonstrated what happened to those who underestimated her. But this was only the beginning. The evidence Sophie possessed didn't just implicate Marcus. It exposed a network of corporate corruption spanning decades, involving multiple companies and powerful figures. The Manhattan Elite Gala was about to become known as the night when America's pharmaceutical industry began to crumble. And at the center of it all, a mother who'd spent 8 years preparing for justice, and a 7-year-old girl whose photographic memory would rewrite history. Sophie tugged her mother's hand. Did we do good, Mommy? Rebecca knelt down, tears streaming down her face, pulling her daughter close. We did perfect, baby. Your grandfather would be so proud. Around them, cameras flashed. Tomorrow's headlines were already being written. The woman Marcus Hollow invited to humiliate had just humiliated him, destroyed his empire, and begun the process of clearing her father's name. And she'd done it all while wearing her mother's pearls and standing in the exact ballroom where the Vandermeer family had once been Manhattan's most celebrated dynasty. The night was far from over. Federal prosecutors wanted statements. Journalists demanded interviews. And somewhere in the chaos, an elderly man approached Rebecca with tears in his eyes. "Ms. Vandermeer," he said, voice shaking, "my daughter Patricia was one of the 73 patients who died in those trials. Marcus Hollow told us it was natural causes. But if what your child says is true..." Rebecca took his hand gently. "Sophie remembers your daughter's name. She remembers all their names, and I promise you, sir, every family will finally get the truth they deserve." The man sobbed, squeezing her hand. "Thank you. Thank you for not letting them be forgotten." And in that moment, Rebecca understood this wasn't just about revenge or justice or clearing her family name. This was about the invisible people, like Patricia Wilkins and the 72 others, whose deaths had been dismissed as statistically insignificant by men who valued profits over human lives. Sophie's photographic memory had given them a voice. Rebecca's courage had given them justice. And tonight, in a ballroom full of Manhattan's most powerful people, the powerless had finally won. The federal investigation moved with unprecedented speed. By Monday morning, every major news outlet in America was covering what journalists dubbed the Gala Takedown. Marcus Hollow's arrest footage played on endless loop, his shocked face, his futile protests, his empire crumbling in real time before Manhattan's elite. But the story everyone wanted was Rebecca's. She sat in a federal conference room, Sophie beside her with a child psychologist present, as prosecutors meticulously documented everything the 7-year-old remembered. And what Sophie remembered was staggering. Patient 17 in the Cardovan trial was Jacob Matthews, age 54. Sophie recited, her voice steady and clear. He received dosage batch C447 on March 12, 3 years ago. His adverse reaction report was filed on March 19th. The report was marked Exclude from Primary Dataset by Dr. Kenneth Marsh on March 21st. Mr. Hollow signed the authorization to destroy the original medical records on March 23rd. The lead prosecutor, Amanda Chen, stared in amazement. "You remember the exact dates?" "I remember everything I see," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "The papers were on Mr. Hollow's desk when Mommy was cleaning. He left them there because he thought nobody would look. But I always look. Mommy says reading helps me learn." Rebecca squeezed her daughter's hand, pride and heartbreak mixing in her chest. Her child shouldn't have had to witness corporate murder, but Sophie's extraordinary gift had become the weapon that would finally deliver justice. "There's more," Sophie continued. "Mr. Hollow had meetings with people who gave him money. I remember their names from the visitor logs I saw when we cleaned the reception area. Senator Richard Blackwood came 6 times. Each time, Mr. Hollow's assistant wrote, "Consulting fee, $50,000 in the appointment book." Amanda's eyes widened. "You're talking about bribery of a federal official." "I'm talking about what I saw," Sophie said simply. "Mommy says I should only tell what I know is true." Over the next 4 days, Sophie's testimony, corroborated by documents Rebecca had preserved from her father's vault, unraveled the largest pharmaceutical corruption scandal in American history. The evidence didn't just implicate Marcus Hollow. It exposed a network of executives, politicians, and researchers who'd spent decades prioritizing profits over patient safety. But while federal prosecutors celebrated their windfall of evidence, Rebecca faced a different battle, reclaiming her life. The media siege was relentless. Reporters camped outside her Queens apartment. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, book deal offers, and movie producers wanting her story. Sophie couldn't go to school without cameras following her. The life Rebecca had carefully constructed in anonymity had exploded into overwhelming public attention. "Mommy, why are all these people taking our pictures?" Sophie asked on the 5th morning, peering through the curtains at the crowd of journalists below. "Because we did something important, baby, and people want to know our story." Rebecca pulled Sophie close, exhaustion evident in her voice. She hadn't slept properly since the gala. The adrenaline of confronting Marcus had faded, leaving her emotionally drained and overwhelmed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rebecca peered through the peephole to see an elderly woman she hadn't seen in 8 years. Eleanor Vandermeer, her father's sister, the one family member who'd believed in Daniel's innocence but had been powerless to help. "Aunt Eleanor?" Rebecca opened the door, tears immediately flowing. The elegant woman swept into the apartment, embracing Rebecca with fierce intensity. "My darling girl, I've been searching for you for 8 years. When I saw you on the news..." She pulled back, studying Rebecca's face. "You look so much like your mother." "I'm sorry I disappeared," Rebecca whispered. "I couldn't face anyone after..." "Hush now," You survived. You protected this extraordinary child. Eleanor turned to Sophie with wonder. And you must be the brilliant Sophie I've been hearing about. Sophie studied her great-aunt with characteristic intensity. You have Mommy's eyes, and you smell like the lavender perfume in the bottles at the old house. Eleanor laughed, delighted. Observant and polite. Your grandfather would adore you. Her expression turned serious as she faced Rebecca. We need to talk about your future. The Vandermeer estate, the family trusts, the company shares, everything that was frozen during your father's legal battles. With Marcus's arrest and the new evidence proving your father's innocence, the courts are moving to restore everything. Rebecca sank onto her threadbare couch, overwhelmed. I don't want the money, Aunt Eleanor. I just wanted the truth. The truth comes with consequences, dear, good consequences. Eleanor sat beside her, taking her hand. Your father was wrongly convicted. The Vandermeer name was destroyed on manufactured evidence. You're entitled to compensation, to restoration, to justice, and more importantly, Sophie deserves the life that was stolen from her before she was born. Over the following week, Rebecca watched as her world transformed again. The Vandermeer family attorneys, who'd maintained Eleanor's legal affairs during the wilderness years, began the complex process of posthumously exonerating Daniel Vandermeer. The evidence Sophie had memorized, combined with documents from the vault, proved beyond doubt that Marcus's predecessor had systematically framed Daniel to cover up their own criminal negligence. Your father's conviction will be overturned, the lead attorney explained during a meeting in Eleanor's Park Avenue apartment. The pharmaceutical fraud charges were entirely fabricated. We are pursuing wrongful death litigation against Hollow Industries, and the preliminary settlement offers are already in the tens of millions. Rebecca barely heard him. She was staring at a photograph of her father, remembering his last words to her before he died in prison. The truth will surface, Rebecca. It always does. You just have to survive long enough to see it. Daddy, I survived, she whispered. We both did. Sophie, sitting beside her mother and coloring in a notebook, looked up suddenly. Mommy, I remembered something else, something important. The room fell silent. Everyone had learned that when Sophie announced she'd remembered something, it was inevitably significant. What is it, sweetheart? Rebecca asked gently. The day Mr. Hollow laughed about inviting you to the party, he was talking to another man on the phone. The man said, make sure the Vandermeer woman stays invisible. We can't afford anyone digging into the old case. Mr. Hollow said, don't worry, she's just a cleaning lady. Nobody important. Sophie's green eyes held unusual intensity. But he knew who you were, Mommy. He knew all along. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't invited Rebecca Hayes to humiliate a random employee. He'd invited Rebecca Vandermeer because he'd somehow discovered her hidden identity and wanted to keep her powerless by publicly degrading her. He was trying to break you, Eleanor said, fury evident in her voice. He wanted to ensure you'd never have the confidence to challenge him or investigate your father's case. Then he made the worst mistake of his life, Rebecca said quietly, steel returning to her voice. Because humiliation is temporary, but the truth? She looked at her extraordinary daughter. The truth is forever, and Sophie made sure the truth survived. Amanda Chen, the federal prosecutor, arrived that evening with news that sent shockwaves through the legal community. Senator Richard Blackwood resigned this morning. 3 pharmaceutical executives have surrendered to authorities, and Marcus Hollow's legal team just approached us about a plea deal. Absolutely not, Rebecca said immediately. He goes to trial. Every victim's family deserves to see him answer for his crimes publicly, just like my father had to. That's what I told them, Amanda said with a satisfied smile. The trial begins in 3 months and Sophie will be our star witness. The weight of that statement settled over the room. A 7-year-old girl with a photographic memory would testify in federal court about corporate murder, political bribery, and systematic fraud. The defense would challenge her credibility, question her reliability, and try to portray her as a coached child repeating her mother's script. I'm scared for her, Rebecca admitted that night after Sophie had gone to bed. She was sitting with Eleanor on the balcony of the Park Avenue apartment, staring at the Manhattan skyline, the same skyline she used to view from the Vandermeer penthouse years ago. Sophie is stronger than you think, Eleanor said. She has your intelligence, your father's integrity, and something uniquely her own, that remarkable mind that sees truth with crystalline clarity. The courtroom won't break her. If anything, she'll break them. Rebecca hoped her aunt was right, because the battle was far from over. Marcus Hollow's legal team was assembling the most expensive defense attorneys in America. The pharmaceutical industry was circling wagons, preparing to protect their own. And powerful people who'd benefited from decades of corruption were now desperate to discredit a 7-year-old girl whose memory threatened to expose them all. "Mommy." Sophie's voice came from the doorway. "I can't sleep. I keep remembering the bad things." Rebecca rushed to her daughter, scooping her up. "It's okay, baby. The bad things are over now." "No, they're not," Sophie said with disturbing certainty. "Mr. Hollow's lawyers are going to try to make people think I'm lying. I heard them talking about it on the news. They're going to say I'm too young to remember correctly. But I do remember, Mummy. I remember everything exactly right." "I know you do, sweetheart, and the truth will protect you." Rebecca carried Sophie to the guest bedroom, tucking her in carefully. "Remember what Grandpa Daniel used to say in the letters he wrote before you were born? The truth is a shield and a sword. It protects the innocent and cuts down the guilty. You're carrying his shield now." Sophie clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Will they put me in jail if I tell the truth?" "No, baby, never. Truth-tellers don't go to jail. Liars do." Rebecca prayed she was right, "And you're the bravest truth-teller I've ever known." As Sophie finally drifted to sleep, Rebecca stood at the window, looking out at the city that had both destroyed and vindicated her family. Somewhere out there, Marcus Hollow sat in a federal detention center, plotting his defense. Somewhere, his lawyers were preparing to attack a child's testimony, and somewhere, the families of 73 dead patients were waiting for justice that had been denied for too long. The gala had been just the beginning. The real battle was about to start, and Rebecca Vandermeer, risen from 8 years of exile, was ready for war. The preliminary hearings began in early December, 3 months after the gala. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan became a media circus, with news crews from every major network positioning themselves for the story that had captivated America, the 7-year-old genius who'd brought down a pharmaceutical empire. Rebecca held Sophie's hand as they navigated through the crowd of reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Eleanor walked beside them, providing both moral support and legal protection as Sophie's appointed guardian ad litem for the proceedings. "Ms. Vandermeer, is it true your daughter has a photographic memory?" Sophie, can you really remember everything you see?" "Rebecca, how does it feel to see Marcus Hollow facing justice?" Rebecca ignored them all, focusing on getting Sophie safely into the courthouse. Her daughter wore a simple navy dress and carried a stuffed rabbit that had been her companion since infancy. She looked impossibly small and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the weight of testimony she carried. Inside the courtroom, Marcus Hollow sat at the defense table surrounded by 6 attorneys, all wearing expressions of calculated confidence. He'd lost weight during his detention, his previous arrogance replaced by cold fury. When Sophie entered, his eyes tracked her with predatory focus. "Don't look at him, baby," Rebecca whispered. "Just focus on telling the truth." Judge Martha Harrison presided with stern efficiency. At 67 years old, she'd built a reputation for no-nonsense jurisprudence and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. She studied Sophie with shrewd assessment as the child took her seat. "Young lady," the judge said gently, "do you understand why you're here today?" Sophie nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm here to tell what I remember about the bad things Mr. Hollow did." "And do you promise to tell only the truth about what you saw and heard?" "Yes, ma'am. Mommy says lying is wrong, and I never lie." Sophie's voice carried clearly through the courtroom, her unusual poise drawing murmurs from the gallery. The prosecution began with softball questions, establishing Sophie's age, her presence in Hollow Industries offices, and her general observational abilities. Then Amanda Chen approached the witness stand with a document. "Sophie, I'm going to show you this paper. Can you tell me if you've seen it before?" Sophie studied the document for exactly 3 seconds. "Yes, that was on Mr. Hollow's desk on October 15th at approximately 3:45 p.m. It's a memo from Dr. Kenneth Marsh about excluding patient adverse reactions from the Cardovan trial data. The memo reference number is HI 2487C, and it was marked confidential. Destroy after review." The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison banged her gavel, but the damage was done. Sophie had just demonstrated her photographic memory with devastating precision. Marcus's lead attorney, Lawrence Bradford, sprang to his feet. "Objection!" The witness is clearly reading from the document in front of her and pretending to recall it from memory. "This is rehearsed testimony." Amanda smiled. "Your Honor, may I remove the document and ask Sophie to continue?" Judge Harrison nodded. Amanda took the paper away. Sophie continued without missing a beat. The memo contains 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph says, "Per our discussion regarding Cardovan trial anomalies, I recommend we reclassify the 17 patient deaths as unrelated to drug administration. The statistical correlation is problematic for FDA approval." The second paragraph discusses moving the problematic data to offshore servers. The third paragraph, "Enough," Judge Harrison interrupted, visibly shaken. "Mr. Bradford, your objection is noted and overruled. The witness may continue." For the next 2 hours, Sophie methodically recited documents she'd seen, conversations she'd overheard, and details that corroborated the prosecution's case with devastating accuracy. She never stumbled, never contradicted herself, and never showed signs of coaching. During a recess, Marcus's legal team huddled frantically. Rebecca watched from across the courtroom, recognizing their panic. They'd prepared to discredit a child's unreliable memory. They hadn't prepared for a witness with perfect recall. "Ms. Vandermeer," Lawrence Bradford approached Rebecca during the break, his expression shifting to calculated sympathy. "This is difficult for everyone involved. Your daughter is clearly traumatized by these proceedings. Mr. Hollow is prepared to offer a substantial settlement." "No," Rebecca said flatly. "This goes to trial. Every family of every patient Marcus killed deserves to see him convicted." "You're using your child as a weapon," Bradford hissed, dropping the sympathetic act. "When this is over, Sophie will be psychologically damaged from reliving these memories, from being cross-examined, from being paraded in front of cameras. Is your revenge really worth destroying your daughter's childhood?" Rebecca stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely controlled fury. "Marcus Hollow destroyed my childhood when he framed my father. He destroyed my daughter's future when he forced us into poverty and exile. And he destroyed 73 families when he chose profits over human lives. So don't you dare lecture me about damage." The afternoon session brought the moment Rebecca had been dreading, cross-examination. Bradford approached Sophie with calculated gentleness, his voice dripping with false kindness. "Sophie, you're a very smart little girl. How old are you again?" "7, sir." 7 years old, and you spend a lot of time with your mother, don't you?" "Yes, sir. Mommy takes care of me." "And your mother tells you stories, I bet. Bedtime stories about princesses and heroes?" Sophie frowned slightly, sensing the trap. "Sometimes." "Has your mother told you stories about your grandfather, about how he was treated unfairly?" Amanda objected immediately. "Your Honor, counsel is leading the witness." "I'm establishing bias," Bradford countered. "This child has been raised on a narrative of victimization. Her testimony is filtered through her mother's vendetta." Judge Harrison considered. "I'll allow limited exploration, but tread carefully, Mr. Bradford." Bradford smiled, thinking he'd won. "Sophie, did your mother ever tell you that Mr. Hollow was a bad man?" "No, sir." The answer clearly surprised him. "No? She never said anything negative about Mr. Hollow?" "Mommy doesn't talk about Mr. Hollow at home," Sophie said clearly. "She talks about being strong and surviving and how truth is important. I decided Mr. Hollow was a bad man by myself because I saw him do bad things and laugh about hurting people." "But you were just a child sitting in an office," Bradford pressed. "So you couldn't possibly understand complex pharmaceutical data." "I can read," Sophie interrupted, her voice taking on unusual steel. "I could read when I was 4. By the time I was 5, I was reading at a 10th grade level." The papers on Mr. Hollow's desk weren't hard to understand. They said patients died and he hid the information. "Even a 7-year-old knows that's wrong," the gallery murmured. Bradford's confident expression wavered. "Let's talk about your memory, Sophie. You claim to remember documents you saw months ago with perfect accuracy. Isn't it possible you're mistaken, that you're confusing different papers or different days?" Sophie looked directly at Bradford, her green eyes unnervingly intense. "Sir, I remember what you had for breakfast this morning." The courtroom fell silent. Bradford froze. "Excuse me? You had coffee with 2 sugars from the cart outside the courthouse at 8:17 a.m. You spilled some on your blue tie and wiped it with a napkin. Then you had a blueberry muffin, but only ate half because you got a phone call at 8:31 a.m. from someone named Jennifer, who said the witness deposition wasn't ready. You told her to figure it out and hung up. Then you threw the rest of the muffin in the trash can by the courthouse steps." Bradford's face went white. Several jury members gasped. Amanda Chen tried to hide her smile. "I remember everything I see and hear, sir," Sophie continued calmly. "That's what photographic memory means. I don't forget. I don't confuse. I don't make mistakes. I remember." Judge Harrison leaned forward. Mr. Bradford, is the witness's description accurate? Bradford stammered, looking trapped. Your Honor, my breakfast habits are not relevant to these proceedings. Your credibility in challenging her memory is relevant, the judge said sharply. Answer the question. Did you have coffee with 2 sugars and a blueberry muffin this morning? Yes, Bradford admitted, defeated. Yes, I did. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Bradford retreated to the defense table, his cross-examination strategy in ruins. He'd tried to portray Sophie as an unreliable child with coached testimony, and she'd just demonstrated her memory was not only accurate but frighteningly comprehensive. As the day's proceedings concluded, Marcus Hollow looked genuinely afraid for the first time. His expensive attorneys had failed to shake a 7-year-old girl's testimony. The evidence she'd provided was being corroborated by forensic accountants and document experts, and the jury was clearly sympathetic to the small child who'd stood up to powerful men and refused to be intimidated. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca held Sophie tightly as they pushed through the media crowd. Her daughter had been extraordinary, poised, honest, and unshakable. But Rebecca could feel Sophie trembling, the accumulated stress of the day finally hitting her. You were so brave, baby, Rebecca whispered. I'm so proud of you. I just told the truth, Mommy, Sophie said, her voice small and tired. Like you taught me. That night back in Eleanor's apartment, Sophie finally broke down. She cried for an hour, releasing all the fear and pressure she'd held inside during her testimony. Rebecca held her, rocking her gently, whispering reassurances while her own tears fell. I don't want to go back tomorrow, Sophie sobbed. I don't want to remember the bad things anymore. I know, sweetheart, I know. Rebecca's heart broke for her daughter, for the childhood that had been stolen by circumstances and necessity. Just a few more days and then it's over. Then we can rest. But even as she comforted Sophie, Rebecca knew the truth was more complicated. The trial would continue for weeks. Sophie would be called back for additional testimony. And even after Marcus's conviction, which now seemed inevitable, the media attention, the public scrutiny, and the weight of being known as the 7-year-old who brought down Big Pharma would follow Sophie for years. Eleanor entered quietly, carrying warm milk and cookies. Our brave warrior needs sustenance, she said gently, sitting beside them. Sophie, did you know your grandfather once told me that the hardest part of telling the truth isn't speaking it, it's living with the courage it requires afterward? Sophie looked up, tears still streaming. It's really hard, Aunt Eleanor. Yes, darling, it is, but you know what your grandfather said next? He said, the cost of truth is high, but the cost of lies is infinite. You saved lives today, Sophie. People who might have taken dangerous medications will now be protected because you had the courage to speak up. Really? Sophie wiped her eyes. I saved people? Dozens, maybe hundreds. Eleanor stroked the child's hair. The FDA is pulling Cardivan from the market. Other pharmaceutical companies are reviewing their safety protocols because of what you exposed. You're a hero, little one, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Sophie considered this, her remarkable mind processing the implications. Then I guess it was worth it, even though it's scary. That's what makes it courage, Rebecca said softly. Being scared but doing the right thing anyway. As Sophie finally fell asleep, exhausted from emotional and mental strain, Rebecca stood at the window overlooking Central Park. The city lights twinkled like stars, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath them. Tomorrow the trial would continue. Bradford would try new tactics to discredit Sophie's testimony, and her daughter would have to be brave all over again. But tonight, Rebecca allowed herself a moment of fierce pride. Her 7-year-old daughter had faced down one of America's most powerful corporate criminals and hadn't flinched. Sophie had taken her extraordinary gift and used it to deliver justice that the legal system had failed to provide. I'm sorry, baby, Rebecca whispered to her sleeping child. I'm sorry you had to grow up so fast, but I'm so proud of who you're becoming. The battle was almost over. The verdict seemed certain. And soon, very soon, Rebecca Vandermeer and her remarkable daughter could finally stop fighting and start healing. The trial stretched through December and into January. Sophie testified 3 more times, each appearance more devastating to Marcus's defense than the last. The prosecution built an overwhelming case. Forensic accountants traced bribes, whistleblowers came forward emboldened by Sophie's courage, and patient families testified about loved ones lost to Marcus's negligence. On January 23rd, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on all 27 counts, including corporate manslaughter, fraud, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Marcus Hollow faced a minimum sentence of 35 years in federal prison. His empire was dissolved, his assets seized, and his name became synonymous with corporate evil. But the verdict brought no triumph to Rebecca. She sat in the courtroom holding Sophie's hand, feeling only exhaustion and hollow relief. Justice had been served, but at what cost? "Mummy, is it over now?" Sophie asked as they left the courthouse for the final time, navigating through celebrating crowds and camera flashes. "Yes, baby, it's over. Can we go home now? Our real home." Rebecca paused. Their real home was a tiny Queen's apartment with peeling paint and noisy neighbors, but the Vandermeer estate had been restored to her ownership. Eleanor's Park Avenue residence was always available, and the settlement from Hollow Industries, still being negotiated, would run into tens of millions of dollars. "Where do you want home to be, sweetheart?" Rebecca asked. Sophie thought carefully, her 7-year-old wisdom somehow containing depths beyond her years. "I want home to be where you're happy, Mummy, where you don't have to clean other people's offices, where we can be together and you smile real smiles instead of tired smiles." Rebecca's heart broke and healed simultaneously. "Then that's where we'll go." The following weeks brought transformation and reflection. Rebecca officially reclaimed the Vandermeer name, dropped Hayes forever, and began the complex process of rebuilding a life that had been paused 8 years ago. The estate in Connecticut was renovated. Her father's name was posthumously cleared, his reputation restored, and a memorial established for the patients who died due to pharmaceutical negligence. But the most important change was internal. Rebecca started therapy to process 8 years of survival mode, grief, and trauma. Sophie began seeing a child psychologist specializing in gifted children, learning to manage her extraordinary memory and the burden it sometimes created. "She's remarkably resilient," Dr. Patricia Wong told Rebecca after several sessions with Sophie. "But she needs structure, normalcy, and permission to just be a kid. Her memory is both gift and curse. She can't forget anything, including things children shouldn't have to remember." "Can she have a normal childhood after all this?" Rebecca asked, fear evident in her voice. "Define normal," Dr. Wong said gently. "Sophie will never be typical. Her memory makes that impossible. But she can be happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. She can have friends, hobbies, and experiences beyond courtrooms and corporate corruption. She needs you to give her permission to be more than the girl who brought down Marcus Hollow." Rebecca took that advice to heart. She enrolled Sophie in a private school specializing in gifted education, where her remarkable abilities were understood and nurtured rather than exploited or feared. She limited media appearances and firmly established boundaries with journalists still hungry for their story. And she made a point of creating ordinary moments, playground visits, movie nights, cookie baking, that had nothing to do with corporate corruption or justice. One February afternoon, as Rebecca and Sophie walked through Central Park watching children play, they encountered an elderly woman on a bench feeding pigeons. The woman looked up, recognition dawning on her weathered face. "You're Rebecca Vandermeer," she said softly, "and this must be Sophie." Rebecca tensed, preparing for another fan or journalist, but the woman's eyes held something different, gratitude mixed with deep sorrow. "My son was Michael Patterson, patient 23 in the Cardovan trials." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "They told us his death was unrelated to the medication. We believed them for 3 years. And then your daughter." She looked at Sophie with wonder. "You remembered his name. You told the truth when no one else would." Sophie stepped forward, taking the woman's hand with surprising gentleness. "I'm sorry your son died, Mum. It wasn't fair. Mr. Hollow should have told the truth." The woman sobbed, pulling Sophie into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for giving us answers. Thank you for making his death mean something." Rebecca watched the exchange, tears streaming down her own face. This was why they'd fought. Not for money or revenge or restored family honor, though those things mattered. They'd fought so that people like this grieving mother could finally have truth, closure, and justice. "Your son mattered," Rebecca told the woman gently. "They all mattered, and Sophie made sure the world knew that." As they continued their walk, Sophie was quieter than usual. Finally she asked, "Mummy, do you think Grandpa Daniel would be proud of me?" Rebecca stopped, kneeling to look her daughter in the eyes. "Baby, your grandfather would be so incredibly proud of you that words can't contain it. You did what he tried to do. You exposed the truth. You protected people, and you did it with courage and honesty that would make him burst with pride." "I miss him even though I never met him," Sophie said softly. "I read his letters to me in the vault, the ones he wrote before he died, hoping I would find them someday. He said I should always choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, and love over fear. He was right, Rebecca whispered, pulling Sophie close. And you lived those words better than most adults ever do. That evening, Eleanor hosted a private dinner at her apartment for the extended Vandermeer family, relatives who distanced themselves during the scandal, but now tentatively returned. Rebecca was surprised to find she didn't resent them. Understanding had replaced bitterness. Fear had made people cruel, and courage was rare. "Our toast," Eleanor announced, raising her glass of sparkling cider, Sophie's favorite, to Daniel Vandermeer, who taught us that truth matters more than reputation, to Rebecca, who survived 8 years of exile without losing her integrity, and to Sophie, who proved that heroes come in all sizes, and sometimes the bravest warriors are 7-year-old girls with extraordinary minds and unshakable moral compasses. "Hear, hear," the family echoed, glasses raised. Sophie beamed, finally looking like the child she should have been all along, happy, loved, and celebrated, not for her testimony or her memory, but simply for being herself. Later that night, as Rebecca tucked Sophie into bed in what was now officially their home, the restored Vandermeer estate, her daughter asked one final question. "Mommy, if you could go back 8 years and change everything, would you? Would you make it so Grandpa never went to prison, and we never had to be poor, and I never had to testify?" Rebecca considered carefully. The honest answer was complex. She'd lost 8 years to poverty and exile. Sophie had been forced to grow up far too quickly. The trauma couldn't be erased, and some scars would never fully heal. But she'd also learned things in those 8 years that wealth and privilege never taught her. She'd learned resilience, empathy, and the dignity of honest work. She'd learned who her real allies were, and she'd raised a daughter who understood that truth and justice mattered more than comfort and status. "No, baby," Rebecca said finally, "I wouldn't change it, because if I changed the past, I'd lose the wisdom we gained. You wouldn't be the extraordinary person you are today, and 73 families would still be wondering what really happened to their loved ones. Our suffering had purpose, Sophie. It was hard, but it mattered." Sophie nodded, accepting this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I'm glad we were strong enough to survive it." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As Sophie drifted to sleep, Rebecca stood at the window overlooking the Connecticut estate grounds. Moonlight illuminated the gardens her mother had once tended, now being restored to their former glory. Somewhere in the distance, lights from neighboring estates twinkled in the darkness. She thought about Marcus Hollow, beginning a 35-year prison sentence. She thought about her father, vindicated but gone. She thought about the long journey from invisibility to visibility, from powerlessness to justice. But mostly she thought about Sophie, her extraordinary, brave, remarkable daughter who'd changed American pharmaceutical oversight forever, who'd proven that children's voices matter, who'd demonstrated that truth, no matter how small its advocate, eventually prevails. The phone rang. Amanda Chen, the prosecutor, calling with news that 3 more pharmaceutical companies had voluntarily submitted to enhanced FDA oversight in the wake of the Hollow trial. Sophie's testimony had rippled far beyond one courtroom, transforming an entire industry. "Your daughter changed the world, Rebecca," Amanda said. "I hope she knows that." "She knows," Rebecca replied softly, "and more importantly, she knows why it mattered." After hanging up, Rebecca returned to Sophie's room, watching her daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in months. No more nightmares about courtrooms, no more anxiety about testimony. Just a 7-year-old girl dreaming whatever 7-year-old girls dream about when the weight of the world is finally lifted from their small shoulders. Rebecca whispered into the darkness, speaking to ghosts and memories and the future all at once. "We did it, Dad. We survived. We fought. We won. And your granddaughter, your extraordinary granddaughter, made sure your name means truth again instead of shame. Rest easy now. Justice has been served, and we're finally free." The Vandermeer legacy had been restored, but more importantly, it had been redefined. No longer just wealth and social standing, it now represented courage, integrity, and the unshakable belief that truth matters, regardless of cost. That legacy would live in Sophie, who would grow up knowing she'd faced America's most powerful corporate criminals and emerged victorious. "Sleep well, my brave girl," Rebecca whispered, kissing Sophie's forehead. "Tomorrow we start the next chapter, and this time we get to write it ourselves." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the estate in pristine white. A new beginning, a clean slate. And two survivors, mother and daughter, finally at peace, finally home, and finally free to be more than their trauma, their testimony, and their fight. The story that began with a cruel invitation to humiliate had ended with dignity restored, justice delivered, and love triumphant. And somewhere in federal prison, Marcus Hollow was learning the hardest lesson of his life. Never underestimate the power of a mother's love and a daughter's truth. The end.